Welcome to Show Your Priors. We're your co-hosts, Michael Nichols and Jason Thompson. We're a business strategy podcast. We look at the week's latest stories and rip them apart to see what strategies and innovations lie underneath. On tonight's show, we interview a leading mind in strategy and innovation, Rita McGrath. Make sure you stick around for that. But before, we'll take a run through the Firehose. And right now, let's dig into the headlines.
Let's do it.
CEOs are laying off workers at a record pace, betting on AI productivity that the data says isn't quite there yet. MIT tested 41 AI models against 11,000 workplace tasks and found they barely met minimum competency, with full proficiency not expected until 2029. But again, that's speculation. Mike, what we've been talking about AI psychosis since episode 1. Is the rest of the world just now catching up to Show Your Priors?
What do you think AI psychosis is? I think we should start there because I have my definition. I'm curious how you see it.
I see it as reinforcing feelings of grandeur or things that you wouldn't normally think you would be correct at a single glance. So if an AI confirms it one time and you're just saying that's Bible truth now, I think that's a form of psychosis.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like some sort of delusions of grandeur detached from the reality on the ground. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things you see with CEOs is they often get very detached from the reality on the ground, the reality of the salespeople out there in the field, the reality of the dev teams. And the other thing is when people pitch up projects to the CEO, they put their best foot forward, right? The best possible PowerPoint, the best possible prototype. And the problem is that those prototypes often give the impression to the CEO that the AI, for example, in this case, is much farther along than it actually is. So they overestimate the capabilities of what AI can actually deliver. So I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about AI psychosis, but it's worse than typical tech psychosis because there's always hype cycles, right, in technology. Yeah. But this one seems to have a particularly strong feedback loop that you're actually rewarded for the psychosis on the market. Right, so if I start making claims that our AI internally is going to cause leaps and bounds in efficiency and reduce our EBIT, it's going to create new digital business models, new channels to market, I actually get rewarded for that. There's no punishment for that.
Yeah.
Because why? And this is always a problem with CEO pronouncements about the future. Well, the bill only comes due in the future. And then we've seen it, and you hinted at it, people making reductions in headcount based on the psychosis, if it even is, right? We have to always have a cynical take there that maybe they know that the AI is not there yet, but you can take advantage of this very, I would say, advantageous environment for this message, and you can push through, ram through some headcount reductions you wanted to do anyway, juice your EBIT, you get rewarded by the market. Call it the AI bump. What do you call it? The meme effect,
the meme effect. If my company reduces and we're all running ragged trying to make things happen, our customers aren't getting the best service, right now it's likely that my customers are in the same boat. So they're also feeling that pain of understaffing, of not having as many resources as they used to have. So it's kind of like, oh, well, if it's happening in our camp, it's okay if it's happening in your camp too. So a lot of the relationships that might suffer, could thrive through this. And also your competition is doing the same thing. So it kind of levels the playing field in that regard a bit as far as, customers are concerned, I would say. An interesting piece that I found in the Harvard Business Review, they had published a piece pointing out that when everyone using AI produces more, the bottleneck moves upstream. So now instead of the bottleneck being at production, the bottleneck is going to be at the people who review the production or approve the production. I kind of found that interesting that onus is going to be moving up the chain.
I think that's right, and I think it's exactly where the maturity of AI is right now. And that's what people are calling slop. Like you can very quickly get a prototype out the door.
Yeah.
right? So it sped up that part significantly, I would say, right? Get the prototype out, ideate, put it out onto a website or whatever very quickly, get it to your bosses very quickly. I think the challenge, though, is that that's happening at an astronomical rate right now. So there are more of those projects to review. And then within any given project, the code base might be massive, and who knows if the devs or the coders have actually reviewed it. So it's the number of projects plus inside of any given project, does the person reviewing it actually take the time to go through and review the security, bugs, privacy, that it actually serves the business interests, et cetera. So I think that's a massive part of what's going on right now. And that's a great thing, right? That we can speed up the early piece of the puzzle. Now, I've always said the biggest thing that kills your new idea is that nobody gives a damn. Customers just don't care. You're not solving anything relevant. So the good thing about speeding up is that realization for engineers comes much faster,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if you're testing it on the market, now the question is, who has the courage and the bravado to tell the CEO that, hey, wait a second, our AI capabilities are not there yet? Because there's this management, I would say bravado, and there's this management mythology that when the CEO asks you, you say, it's all under control. It's all good. We're going to reach the targets, etc. So when they cut headcounts, what is your job as a manager to say, I can handle it. We'll get more with less. Radical accountability, these books and stuff you see out there. You can hear I'm a little bit skeptical of this. If you cut a fundamental resource from your business model, that is just simply risky for the business,
Yeah.
right? And it may not show up in this year's targets. And the question is, does the CEO care? They hit their targets this year, investors are off their back, they get the bump, they get the bonus. Well, what happens in 2 to 3 years? Have you fundamentally undermined your business model? You'll hear me coming back to this and back to this and back to this. Happens in PE. It's not just AI. I think it's a structural problem with the way that we incentivize management.
Yeah.
And then underneath, there's a lack of courage at middle management and below to tell the truth going upwards. That's the truth. But there's a lack of courage for a very damn good reason, because they will get punished under this idea of radical accountability. You just get it done, doesn't matter. Well, it does matter if you need to launch a major application with only one engineer, right? And then you're surprised if there are bugs or security failures, et cetera. So the hope is that AI would help that one engineer do it, but you already said the problem. One engineer without a reviewer, that's not even the business part yet. That's just the engineering piece. So I think there's going to be a big business in mopping up a lot of messes that are being created right now.
That's true. I would agree with that 100%. All right, let's go now to Robinhood, who just launched 2 products that let AI agents autonomously trade your brokerage account and spend on a virtual credit card. No human approval required on any of these transactions. This is one of the first times agentic AI has had direct access to real money at this scale. And Stripe, Amazon, and Google all have launched similar infrastructure in the same couple, I guess in these past 2 weeks, actually. Are you going to sign up for agentic credit cards tomorrow, Mike?
No. What I was curious about on this one is, will this agentic system or agents, will they outperform day traders, for example? Will they outperform, professional traders, the funds? I don't know the answer, but who would you bet on? Would you bet on the agents, or would you bet on humans? Because, the book, there's a book out there, I think it's called A Random Walk Down Wall Street. Probably you invest in index funds, so you've basically inhaled the message of that book, right? Which is, you can't beat the market.
Yeah.
There are information inefficiencies, but they're rare and they're difficult to find unless you have some sort of insider trading advantage, which we will talk about, I think, later.
I think you can beat the market, but you have to invest a lot of yourself and your time and your knowledge and learning to
Right.
that. And that's not how I want to
Right.
live my life. So for me, it's not worth the
Well,
what you
and
have
it's
to give.
difficult for humans to do that. Even if you're a professional trader, you're still limited by your own human brain, your own biases, your own targets that your bosses above are giving you.
Yeah.
You're going to be pumping certain things for political reasons or for your own incentives. And the question is whether an AI can do that better. Can they ingest all the information on the market better, more efficiently? The big danger is the hallucinations. Right? I don't know how they keep it deterministic. So deterministic, when I say that, is if you do X, you get Y, and the data is, secure, it's factual, and then the way the AI uses it, it uses it in a deterministic manner to make bets based on that data, right? Like there's a clear link between the data and what it's doing. It's not just making shit up on the fly.
Well, let me clarify the technology here a little bit. So Robinhood is using something called MCP, which is
Yeah.
model context protocol. So you can use whatever model you want. You could use one that is looking at market data,
Yeah.
the basics of a company, the fundamentals, or you can use one that's just strictly looking at chart movements. And when it sees a pattern trigger, it's looking at that. AI trading has been going on for a while. It's one of the most successful, I think, aspects of AI right now, or the most well hashed out and reality tested part of it right now is trading. And it's, to my knowledge, you get the benefit when you are very low latency, the first people to act on a market movement. But beyond that, you're not going to be getting the value. So I'm kind of interested to see. Yeah. So if you're not, at the bleeding edge of latency and have those correct handshakes like a Citadel has, I don't know if you're going to see benefit from it.
If everybody's deploying agents, will anybody get any sort of arbitrage advantage or a time advantage? I don't know. So back to the question, humans or AI, what would you trust more as an index fund guy?
It depends on where the masses are. If the masses are in AI, I could see them ganging up on the same stocks and just loading stuff up in a very meme fashion, for no other reason than that's where volume is going. I don't know, but that's still, again, they could also do the other thing. So
Yeah, it's interesting that the AI could follow the path of the humans. Like they're a chartist, they're a fundamentalist, right?
That's true.
That could be interesting.
Yeah.
Depends on what the prompt is in the end.
I think the markets are also going to go to 24 hours. At least that's been rumored for a couple of years now. So if that ever does happen, then I think the robots are going to win.
Great. So we can have 24-hour CEO psychosis.
24-hour CEO psychosis, 24-hour placing your bets on whatever. I saw somebody on, I can't remember what they were betting on, but I saw somebody betting on, it was a highway camera. It was a camera looking at a highway, and there was a line, and it was how many cars would pass through that line in the next 10 minutes or something like that.
I bet $1,000. Bro, am I gonna win this? Please, 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 please. Bro, over 16? Go through. Holy shit! We just won 3.7K.
What are we doing? It's crazy. It's crazy.
Hey man, tulip mania.
Yeah, something like that. All right. Let's go now to AI coming for our jobs, as 99% of CEOs are planning AI-driven layoffs. Of course they are. Coders are now refusing to work without AI, even as research shows it's making them worse. And 1 in 3 American men have left the workforce. What's your take on this AI workforce disruption? We've already talked about it a little bit tonight. But
I'm not sure about the data behind these. The 99% of CEOs planning AI-driven job cuts. That would seem to confirm the psychosis, right? Because behind that, this is me again. I'm going to go down into like a causal model and a business model.
Do it.
So does AI apply to every single business out there? Like if you're just pure hardware or a pure service business with people, actually, do you need AI? Maybe. You'd say, well, maybe the salespeople can use AI, whatever, for customer service, for, like Salesforce type tasks. So I get it. Maybe there are places. So, but it's a little crazy. 99% of CEOs, I would want to fact check that to make sure. But okay, there's that. And then the coders. So this is one of those things where you got to be careful about looking at the existing definition of a job, I think. So coders, if they're just producing code, they're in trouble, right? Because AI is basically copied. You've heard Dario say that. I think Sam Altman said the same thing. It's basically copied every possible GitHub repository out there and been trained on all the code out there. So it's going to be able to mimic that for sure. What the question would be is, how are they using it? What are they using it for? Is it for what we said earlier, like this early prototyping? But then if you want to get to scale and security, protect privacy, can you still do it that way? Or do you have to actually go back to software engineering, like the fundamentals? I know for the application we're making, you can definitely do the vibe coding up front to test out new prompts, etc. But if you want to scale that thing into an enterprise company, no chance.
Yeah.
I sent you a list, right, from one of the IT or a digital department of the requirements for our application. They are difficult.
Yeah.
Right. And I have real engineers, real software engineers who are not just vibe coding stuff. And it's still hard, right, with traditional software engineering.
Yeah.
So what I wonder is it a shift from coding as a job description into like a software orchestrator? I know that word doesn't really exist, but that's the thought I had is if you're vibe coding the upfront piece, the lead in to the point where you actually have to do review and engineering and think about the scaling, is your job definition just shifting? Or is it really just coder, software engineer? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think you got to be a little bit careful there. Are they really putting like the death knell out there or putting the nail in their own coffin? I don't know. I think with new technologies, job descriptions probably should shift. And is that what's happening? The last thing you mentioned was the men, what was it, 1/3 of the work?
1/3 are leaving the workforce or have left the
1/3.
workforce.
So this is a long-term trend. If you show the charts, there's a long-term trend that I don't think has anything to do with AI.
Yeah.
You'd want to dig into the numbers. How much of that is retiring? How much of that is other things? I don't know. Maybe they're gaming full-time. That's their job and it doesn't count.
Well,
I don't know.
the
Services.
Yeah, the like Uber Eats and Uber
Yeah,
regular.
the gig economy.
The gig economy, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know.
That takes you out of the
I don't know. I know a lot of people that just prefer that, by the way, and they're men mostly.
Nothing
But
wrong
what
with
I found interesting when I did a little research was that downward trend for men. It's been going on for a long time, and it's directly countered by an uptrend for women.
I've read
If
that
you
too.
look at the chart,
Yeah.
right? So, is that just a societal shift where women are participating much more heavily in the workforce than they did in the past? And this is just a reflection of that. And maybe, although it looks like people aren't dating anymore, but maybe in the newly found relationships, there's a negotiation about, who works and who doesn't. Maybe it's just there are more trade-offs in that calculation now, and women are working more than men did in the past because of those relationships. But again, you have to look, you see this downward thing, you got to dig into it. It's not univariate, it's got to be multivariate, and you have to look into all the variables.
No, you can just let your Claude bot go to work for you, and then you can date it. And you can even talk to it at work. It won't tell you no.
According to Elon, we're done working, right? It's post-labor.
Damn right. Interesting thing that I saw on this one was that Amazon had shut down an internal AI productivity leaderboard called Kiro Rank, according to whatever I read, because employees were gaming it by burning tokens without producing anything useful.
This is the fundamental rule in all of human nature.
Yep.
If you put in a rule or a KPI, it will be gamed.
Yeah.
You create incentives you never could have foreseen. It happens every time. And still, the whole management game is trying to put metrics in there, KPIs, what do they call it? Leading indicators. And they're never leading. They're just like deterministic KPIs that can easily be gamed. Good example, can tell us some of your sales experience. I saw a sales team that started getting rewarded for leads. Oh my God. It's predictable what's going to happen there. What will happen?
Terrible quality leads. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what you're getting rewarded for.
Yeah.
And you always got to be aware of this. Like, people get rewarded for margin. They'll start gaming towards margin. They get rewarded for leads. They game towards leads. You get trash leads, right? Or if you game towards volume, watch your margins shrink like hell because they're going to lower the price just to get the volume. And you don't blame these people for that. You've created that incentive, right? And so this is not a surprise. That's my public service message. It's called The Tyranny of Metrics. Also a very good book, by the way. Once you start optimizing on one KPI, it will be gamed.
Yeah. All right. I completely agree. And this will change a little bit when token price comes down, just because I think, I read the stat that most of the tokens, 40% of the tokens or something like that, are being used reviewing the errors that AI has made itself. And as token costs and the compute costs comes down, I think we will start seeing.
That's a very good point. So I've seen a lot of commentary on token-based pricing.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a dilemma because of incentives again. So why are they measuring tokens? Because it's driving the cost. So when people start to price based on tokens because their cost basis is tokens, you might unintentionally, right, in your pricing structure, create an incentive for your customers to use fewer tokens, which you don't want to do. You want customers to use your product as much as possible. So it actually happened at Amazon, right? So, well, let's see if it happens at Amazon. If they had to get rid of it because it was maybe pushing costs in the wrong direction. But you can imagine another manager reducing the incentive to use tokens because it's driving his cost center.
Budget goes away quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, time will tell, but it's an interesting tug of war with what's going on. Okay, well, this one's been a hot button issue this week, and that is that Ferrari has unveiled its first ever fully electric vehicle. And the reception has been very rough. One analyst called it a mix between a Honda and a Tesla. The shares dropped 5% on the announcement, and the internet had really strong opinions. What did you think about the Luce, Mike?
So we've talked about brand identity a lot. Yeah. And Harley Davidson was my example. You can get trapped in a very traditional brand, and then it's very difficult to extricate yourself from that brand identity. We've seen others struggle with this. Some of the recent controversies around certain beer, or even Disney running into controversies. So that's where I took this in my brain. What is Ferrari's traditional brand? What is it? What is it to you?
It is the poster in my bedroom as a boy. Like, it's that car that's not attainable except for the very select few, and it's done that successfully for a very long time. So
it comes from racing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's racing, which means it's performance. It's luxury. It's Italian luxury. It's elitist.
Yep.
This one comes with a price tag of $550,000.
$640, I think, is the US.
$640. So okay. Yeah, not much difference there. So 500 to 600, you're signaling exclusivity, luxury, etc. You cannot have someone then say it looks like a Honda or a Tesla. Even Tesla is expensive as hell for most of us.
Yeah,
not that expensive, right? Yeah. It's not that exclusive. So I think this is what's interesting for me is that it came with it being its first EV. How do you take that performance, luxury, elitist, luxury brand, right, and convert it into EV without destroying it? This is a question. Because for me, Ferrari, that's the ICE engine.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they've successfully put, electric motors into cars to complement their combustion engines. Yeah. I'm pretty sure Lamborghini completely backed off their electric vehicle plans because of customer pushback. But at the end of the day, we're seeing all of this because of, in US we call it CAFE laws. In Europe, it's like a 90% emission reduction by 2035 is what it is now. So, and that's, of all vehicles registered. So there's ways to game that too. And vehicle manufacturers gamify the emissions.
So for people listening, that means in your fleet of cars that you produce, you got to have a certain percentage that meet the regulations, right? At least that kind of ramp up. I do have to say, this was one analyst. the ultimate arbiter of whether this will be successful or not will be the customers.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know, the elite, they spout off a lot of green stuff, right? So they seem to be hip with the green. The question is, will they pay 550,000 for that? I don't know. Maybe.
The closest thing
not
to
if
this,
it looks like a Honda.
the closest thing to this is the Rolls-Royce. I think it's the Spectre, the electric Spectre, and it's $500K. It's $100,000 less. It still looks like a Rolls-Royce. It is known for being quiet and supple and plush. And EV translates to that world very easily in my eyes. Whereas
it's almost too quiet.
Not from a Ferrari, right? Like it's a strange, and not even that. I mean, I still think you can make an electric vehicle cool in a Ferrari way, but this, our friend of the show, Scott Newton, this week made a post where it was comparing it directly to the Nissan Leaf. That's a terrible, terrible post for Ferraris. It's crazy. And,
that's like your Harley looks like a moped.
yeah. And even if it's aimed at China, I did a little research about how China took it. And from what I can tell, just about the same as we did in America. Not very well, especially when you're looking at cars like Xiaomi for 30K USD, looking way cooler than this brick. It's an ugly car. Some of the interior features are cool. And it's a weird, we haven't seen it next to any other cars, but from my understanding, it's that weird size range between like an actual crossover and a car.
Like a coupe?
The Toyota Crown Insignia, if you know what that is this new weird vehicle size that I think is the same thing as the Ferrari. It's a strange...
station, maybe the station or the Elko is coming back.
Station wagons are cool, man. I will go to the grave on that one. Station wagons are cool.
One of my best friends had an El Camino in high school. I love that car.
Yeah, El Camino.
I would love to see an El Camino come back, man.
One of our baseball coaches drove like the OG Volvo V80 station wagons. Man, that thing was, in his own way, I didn't realize at the time, but he didn't give a shit at what people thought about him, and that is so cool.
That's why you drive an Elko.
Exactly. I don't know. We'll have to watch and see how it sells. I have heard that there is a VIP list that, usually among dealers have these VIP lists where their best customers get to buy the high-end, super rare cars. So you have to buy X number of cars to be the best whatever. I have heard that most dealerships with this Ferrari are not, you don't have to buy this to remain on any VIP list. Like, it's not considered. So, I mean, we'll see what sales do, because then the numbers will be tainted by people trying to get later releases, right? We'll see what it does. All right. Waymo is now dominating autonomous vehicle registrations, leaving Tesla in the dust. And this week, they debuted a brand new robotaxi that is Chinese-made, designed to be profitable and already accepting riders. What's going on here, Mike? Tesla has 42 cars registered in Texas.
So Waymo has Waymo.
I think 577, something like that. Yeah, Waymo.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. But the article there was suggesting that Waymo is dominating Tesla. What am I going to do? They are not the same business model.
Yeah.
Waymo right now is fleets, right? It's automated robotaxis. That is not Tesla. Tesla's in a completely different game. But still, the number of registrations, didn't Elon move to Austin? If I'm not incorrect.
He moved to Starbase City or whatever they're calling it. Yeah.
Yeah, where's that Texan pride to start buying some Teslas from Elon? It's also a red state, but maybe not in Austin, right? So I think the thing I was thinking there is really fundamentally, you can't compare these two to say that one is dominating the other. And this is a good example of focusing on a KPI like registrations, which don't tell the whole story.
Well,
just don't.
Musk promised us 1,000 robotaxis by 2024 and 2025.
So that's a good point. Why would he do that?
Because he pumps the value of his companies on baseless statements.
This is a good example of, that would be one place where you would critique his strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Have you ever seen the master plan that he put on his website? He puts Tesla's strategy on his website. They're up to like the third version by now, or fourth version.
I actually have it.
It was basically like three statements. We'll release this, elite luxury car, and then we're going to spread into as it starts to gain traction, the infrastructure is built, we're going to build an affordable EV for everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, but that typically is a horrible strategy. To start where Ferrari is, right, as a luxury elite brand.
Yeah.
And my friends out at Berkeley used to say, well, why did people buy a Tesla? It's to show you that they have $100,000 and you don't. Right? So that customer group, they do not want to be seen driving the Nissan Leaf, right? Or, right? That's the whole point. If your strategy is to go from an elite car down to a commodity car, that often backfires because
Agree.
it kills your home base, which is your elite people. They don't want to be seen driving the same cars as the plebes. So that's why I point out. So does Tesla's brand identity fit with robotaxis? That's a completely different thing unless you're selling into robotaxi elite luxury fleets. I don't know. Those models exist with the rental car companies. That could be. It's a good question. I've seen a lot of Teslas when you jump out at the airport, and it's one of the options. So who knows?
Oh yeah, for like an Uber, for sure. Yeah, you get a Model Y, Model 3, go Uber. Makes a lot of sense. My issue with it is that Musk pumped his stock a ton on the fact that robotaxi is going to be everywhere. I remember the event where he paraded the robotaxi. It came out. It was a driverless vehicle. It was shaped completely different. It looked like it had a circular U couch inside of the vehicle. It's been, in their presentations for a long time, these robotaxis, and they're just not delivering on them. And they finally debut them, and they are the people I saw get in the robotaxis had a person in the passenger seat who could take over the pedals and the controls at any time because they were not fully autonomous yet. Whereas Waymo has been doing the full autonomy thing for a while now. Now they still have issues. I've seen videos of them, stuck at a light because there was something in the road.
Well, I think you could take that away from that article. They're far ahead on, and probably even their technological approach to full automation.
Yeah.
Right?
I think, Elon hamstringed himself by saying we're going to do this all on vision only with, just the video tech only. I think it really hamstringed them, but, we'll see.
What does Waymo use? Is it LiDAR or what are they using?
They have a number of things. They have vision, and I know they have LiDAR on top. That's the big spanny thing. And then they have sensors and all. They have a full suite of stuff, whereas Tesla, as I understand it, is trying to just use dual cameras on the windshield.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. We'll have to see how it turns out. I suppose we will see. Also, an interesting fact is that year over year from 2025 to 2026, Cybertruck sales are down 40%, but 75% of those sales went to SpaceX. Elon's company. Just,
Hey, man.
I don't know. One of our comments said, the fundamentals have never been great and never been better in the Max 7. Well, maybe in 6 of them. I don't know. Okay.
Define fundamentals, right? Define fundamentals.
Yeah, define fundamentals. What is your prior on a fundamental? Let's go to the Firehose, Mike. Let's do the rapid fire news.
Let's do it.
We've got all the energy and water usage numbers for AI, and they look pretty insignificant, to be honest. Gemini text prompt uses about as much energy as a Google search did. So what's the fuss about?
I think this is I think one of our commenters also pointed out on one of our shorts that this has become ideological.
Yeah.
And when it becomes ideological, we talked about AI psychosis, but it's running in two separate directions. I think there's the absolute hype psychosis that you're seeing with tech CEOs and the tech world in general that Mark Andreessen references a lot. If you don't have AI psychosis, something's wrong with you right now. I think there's a psychosis on the other side that is fundamentally opposed to all things AI, no matter what, and will find any reason to attack it. And there are often environmental concerns attached to that view. There is NIMBYism on that side. Let's just be honest. So there are two sides with, I think, views that are detached from the fundamentals. You just used the word right now. And one of the things we kept hearing is like they're consuming too much water, right? They're consuming too much energy.
Yep.
So let me challenge the people on that side. It's not that I disagree with you, but this is what we do here, right? We challenge people's assumptions. The article points out that, yeah, it doesn't actually use that much energy. And over the last year, the energy consumption of Aquarius dropped like 33-fold. And this is one of the dangers. It could be that you formed your psychosis a year ago or even 2 years ago when AI was super inefficient, when the hallucinations were worse. I remember for our application, it would have been impossible to code it a year ago, maybe even 8 months ago at this point, but it's moving that rapidly. The other point I would bring up is we talk about energy as if it's zero sum. So when I say zero sum, there's a fixed pie of energy. So my point would be if that's the problem, and it's never clear what people are really against this for, if that's the problem, build more energy. Make it easier to build energy. China's scaling their stuff up like crazy because they've decided the solution to that is build out.
Yep.
Build nuclear, build coal. Don't care what you build. Just keep building and building and building. And meanwhile, our debate is stuck around, the regulations around it, what to build, where to build. It's probably going to differ by the state. That's the good part of the United States, the laboratory, where you can experiment with different energy, different subsidies, attract energy companies, and it's not federally led. So you don't get that state-led model in China where you can just scale up really fast. You get more experimentation. There are trade-offs to both. So that would be my challenge to people who seem to be obsessively focused on this water issue and energy issue is we could build more, but if that's not what you're worried about or what the concern is, please tell us what it is.
Yeah. Really, my only input on this topic is one, it's not destructive to water. It doesn't destroy the water. The water is it diverts the water. It drains the water from one place and puts it in another place, but it is not any more destructive to water than a dam would be.
Well, in processed water, like I worked at a company that dealt with processed water. There's good technology around that to clean it, recycle it, et cetera, and filter it. There's zero liquid discharge technologies. So I just wonder if it's just like this innate, I call it psychosis on both sides. I think some people, it's more the uncertainty around the technology that's driving this and people don't understand it. We talk about it every week, but it's even moving too fast for us probably, right? Sure. So again, show your priors, review your priors, and you're going to have, this is the perfect issue. AI is moving so fast that you need to update your priors every week. And maybe even every day. But don't do it like this. Don't swing wildly in one direction and then the other direction. Because you'll see X is famous for this. There'll be a doomsday post. Oh my God, we're all going to die because AI has this new capability. You saw that around Mythos, right? Mm-hmm. Or, oh my God, nobody's ever going to have to work again. It's either one or the other. Then there are they're typically European accounts will hop on and basically say, AI is too unsafe. We have to regulate it now before it's too late, right? So you're getting these wild opinions on both sides while we're trying to all sort our way through it. And perfect topic for show your priors, update your priors. Don't fall for the psychosis. Let's just say it that way.
All right. Google's AI-powered search, their overhaul, is killing traditional SEO. That's search engine optimization. That's where we put this week's subjects are, and then Google returns your results when you search for our show and that topic. That's SEO. DuckDuckGo initials are up 30% as users push back against being force-fed AI results. Take those results, says Google. Bruh. What do you think, Mike?
So what did I do? I sent you a screenshot. So I ran a test.
Yeah.
I went to DuckDuckGo. I actually like DuckDuckGo because it has this private mode that's better than the others.
You would. Who knows what you're searching for?
Yeah, God knows, right? So I'm searching for things like this story. So I searched for this story on DuckDuckGo, and what came back was a search assist. Right? It's in the screenshot I sent you. There's a search assist, and the search assist was AI. Okay. And then on the screenshot, besides the search assist, which you can turn off, to be fair,
Yep.
you can also turn it off on Google. There's a, or at least you could, maybe that has changed. There's a doc.ai up there. So people have run from Google with the assumption that DuckDuckGo is a refuge from AI. And the first thing you get when you search about the story is an AI generated overview. I find that kind of funny. And that goes back to my point. I don't think you can survive right now as a search engine without AI. I just think it's here. Maybe, but you know what that strategy is called? They call that last man standing. So here's the question. Could you be the last man standing where you reject AI and only run pure old school search? Could you?
Maybe.
Well, it depends on how strong that poll is out there with the psychosis that's anti-AI.
It
There
depends
might
on-
actually be a play there. I don't know. But is it long-term sustainable? I don't know.
I think the piece that we're not seeing yet is how effective the marketing with baked in marketing into AI is going to be. I think that that's what these companies have seen already, is that it's going to be more akin to content-based advertising. So, content-based advertising gets big bucks because it's effective. Because when you have product placement inside of content from trusted influencers, it sells products. This is going to be kind of similar, where AI is going to suggest, when you search for, oh man, I have a headache, and it's going to say, oh, well, you should just take 2 Advil. It takes care of your headaches, or whatever company it decides to sell you that day. It could be a lot more effective than just the sponsored posts that we see today. I think that's going to be the differentiator for these companies, is the ad revenue that they're able to generate off of AI versus search traditionally. So I don't know. We haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure they've tested.
Hey man, if you pay the dang gelt, in this case, if you take a Google Enterprise contract, you might be placed high up there, right?
Yeah,
It's the recommended solutions to your problems.
could be. This one kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, in a kind of a sick AI loop. Companies like US Bank and Target are now using AI-generated synthetic customers to run market research at a speed and scale that human surveys could never. This sounds highly sycophantic to me. What I wrote in my script. So that's true.
I first heard about this last year at Imperial College in London. Steve Blank, the big lean startup guru, was talking about the fate of lean startup, and he made this statement. It's the first time I'd heard the phrase that in his approach to innovation, the first thing you do is not build something. The first thing you do is you go talk to 50, 100 customers. Okay? And the idea behind that is to detect whether the problem you believe is real is actually real, and you don't just hallucinate it and start building tech. And when you build the tech, you go out and find out nobody actually wants it. This is a very expensive way to fail. He mentioned, well, I still believe you need to do that, but you can now these days hook it up to like XAI or the Grok, right? You can hook it up to social media, and you can create something called a synthetic customer, or a synthetic customer persona, synthetic customer profile. And what this does is takes actual data from the world, quantitative data, or from APIs, MCPs, right? You mentioned that earlier. And then you can start to simulate how customers might react to this based on what they're actually saying in those environments, right? So it would be a way of getting a first sort of thumbs up whether your first hypotheses about the customer are right or not. It's another way to say, given our existing data, are there customer persona profiles that we haven't recognized yet? You can maybe spin those up. So it's kind of like, the way I read it was a good article, I think, by Bain. I'm not the biggest consulting fan, you know that, but it was pretty good to get a good understanding of what synthetic customers are and what they're being used for. They're kind of it looks like they're starting to replace the traditional marketing methods like clustering and different ways of marketing to get that early feedback on what the customer segmentation could look like, the pricing, etc. And it's kind of like wargaming in that sense that you can spin up these synthetic customers and then test your theories on them, but it's still speculative, right?
Yeah.
It's still based on if you want to do something fundamentally new, it's not often the case that you can take the existing data on the market, like disruptive, right? Take the existing data on the market and then derive from that the disruptive idea. It's possible. I'm not saying it's not.
Well, Ferrari should start using this stuff.
Yeah, that would be one company that could benefit from it. But what's your take as a sales, professional?
Slop in, slop out. It depends on what
the
you
data.
put in. If I tell Ted in innovation to give me his 10 best ideas, or I tell AI to give me the 10 best ideas, it's going to all depend on what these synthetic customers are, what their prejudices are. Like, they're still going to have biases. So I don't know. I don't know if they're going to outperform Ted. I assume they will in the long run. I don't know when we get there, though. Probably not
But
today.
it's better than a synthetic customer is better than not talking to any customers at all.
True.
Which is a very typical practice in corporate where people fixate on technology, launch new technology to no customers.
Yeah. I do
Right,
think it
so-
gives us views from scale that we wouldn't have before. I think in that regard.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a thumbs up. How big could this market be? At least the early indicators are like this. Right?
Well, let's talk about an expensive failure. Jeff Bezos' rocket company had a bad week. It's not funny, but the new Glenn rocket exploded during testing in Florida. It's a setback for Blue Origin as it tries to compete in the space race increasingly dominated by Mr. Musk and SpaceX.
Hey, did you see Musk tweet about this?
I didn't.
Basically, it was sympathetic. And I'm looking at your face to see how you respond to this. Here's the tweet that I saw. Rockets are hard. Most unfortunate. Hope you recover quickly. So here's the question. Is that genuine? And why might it be genuine? So we talked about billionaires competing against each other. Do you think he really cares that Bezos' rocket bit the dust or not? And I'll give you my take. What do you think? Why would he care if he does actually care?
The first sentence you read was when I picked. Can you say that again? Can you tell me the exact statement?
Rockets are hard. Most
Okay.
unfortunate. Hope you recover quickly.
Yeah, I mean, coming from him, that sounds, I don't know, a little bit insincere, but he's also had a lot of things explode, and he's had criticism.
Yeah.
So he's been down that path. I'm sure he understands. From a personal standpoint, I don't know.
So what might else be out there? My thought was, I think he's afraid because when something like this happens and government sees it, they go into safety mode.
Yeah.
And then he might be afraid, whether it happens to Bezos or to him. I'm looking for the self-interest here, right? That if government steps in, puts a pause on things, that actually slows down innovation. And that's a bad thing for both parties. It's a bad thing for Elon. It's a bad thing for Blue Origin, right? And I think, what's interesting about this? In innovation, we often say, fail fast, right? With rockets, it seems unacceptable, right? People don't seem to accept the fact that when you're experimenting with rockets, that you're going to make mistakes. Now, as long as there aren't people on board. Now, let's put a spectrum on this. So, fail fast works really well in the software world where there aren't so many victims. There are barely any victims. You can do A/B testing as long as you're honest and ethical. A lot of people aren't. As long as you're honest and ethical, that's a good way to test early versions. Well, the rocket, it's hardware. It's a bomb, basically, that can go off at any point if there's even a minor mistake. So I find the psychology around that interesting. And those are the types of things that politicians look at because they're big and explosive and big news stories. And you got to show that you're on top of it and you're going to regulate it and make it safe. But the consequence would be if you slow down the race to space, the race to Mars, and he has an incentive to not slow that thing down. So fail fast on cheap things that don't hurt anybody, but when it gets where it could be dangerous, we often have a no fail at all policy. So I would even admit in nuclear, it's a fail never. Don't fail fast in nuclear, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even imagine saying that in nuclear. So there are certain things that are safety critical that need innovation. But one of the things about nuclear is, and I think it's one of the problems that we face today, scaling it, is that we were so concerned about safety. We drove the costs so high because of regulations that we've barely seen any innovation in it. Now, you get really safe nuclear, but you don't get to experiment with the modular stuff that we're finally, after a long time, starting to see. So I probably took that way farther than you wanted to on that one, but I found that tweet interesting. And yeah, I actually have sympathy for Bezos. That's expensive, but those expensive failures are actually what innovation's about. Learn, move on, launch the next one.
Well, I hear Elon's trying to sell more compute after his deal with Anthropic, so Bezos could be a good target for that. He probably is being sincere.
Ish.
Sincere-ish, but they do have, whenever they change a parameter, so if there's a new satellite model or there's a new rocket model, they do tests to send the first one up as a test.
Yeah.
And then it's just sometimes things are going to blow up when you're dealing with rockets.
Yeah.
All right. Meta officially launched paid subscriptions for Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp this week, with AI features tied to payment tiers. It's a significant strategy pivot for that company, which has built its entire empire on ad revenue.
Right. So that would be a shift in the business model. It's one of the best examples of a two-sided market where it only monetizes on one side, so it has a massive free user base. Now, it's not free totally. You have to sell your data and your eyes and your attention, right? So it's not like it's totally free. But then Facebook monetizes that with their engagement metrics that make sure people are watching, and they sell that engagement to the advertisers, right? So that's a massive departure if you now say, and they were careful, we're going to start adding subscriptions. So the target segments, when I looked into it, are businesses. I don't know what businesses will pay for that. Maybe it's advertisers again, creators, and Meta AI users. But I honestly, in some of the features like super reactions, I'm like, what the hell is that? Story insights. AI does that. So already for free. So it was hard for me to see what exactly anyone would pay for this and why they would ever pay for it. I mean, super reactions. I'm thinking, well, I'm still the old school GIF king. So
I guarantee you there will be some sort of blue check or green check or something next to your name when you pay for something.
Yeah. Yeah, but to me, the subscriptions, they're just too many right now.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
There are too many, and it's getting to be overwhelming in my opinion. And I'm not against subscriptions or anything, but if I can't see the value, I don't know. I'm just not in that segment, I guess.
Well, at the base level, it's the same thing as getting a subscription to a gym. It's always, the gym has had the subscription model for the longest, in my opinion, for a long time. And
when was the last time you used Facebook, by the way? Speaking of gyms.
Oh, God. Never. Like, actually used it? Never. I mean, it's been a long time. I've been deactivated. I think I might be active right now because I wanted to start using Facebook Marketplace because Craigslist just isn't there anymore.
I think I used it this year. And I looked at my timeline. I think the last time I used it was 10 years. But I was trying to find someone. Right? That's why I started looking at it.
Yeah.
By the way, if you look at your old post on Facebook, that's embarrassing. So there was a little cleanup crew going on when I looked at my old Facebook post.
Oh, yeah.
But I would never pay for that thing. I barely use it in the first place. But
do you pay for Twitter? You pay for the mark on Twitter?
I did, but I quickly questioned that decision after like a month of using it.
I think it's the same thing.
Then.
And it's an interesting thing is Apple saw their phone sales go down when the camera on the back didn't change configuration or size because people don't know at a glance that you have the new one. So why do people buy? So there's got to be some sort of visual cue.
Well, there's got to be a limit to that. How many of those can you show at some point? But again, I don't know if they'll shed free users because they're not charging them.
Right.
So that's different from OpenAI, where it was a little bit more of a controversy. If you start trying to charge subscriptions to a free user base, that's way more difficult.
Yeah. They may put some constriction on it. No fake, only 10 fake news posts for you per week if you don't pay. All right. A sneak peek now. Yeah, a sneak peek at a redesigned Siri app reveals Apple is building something far more ambitious than just a voice assistant. It's a direct play to compete with ChatGPT and other conversational AI products.
Remember we talked about OpenAI considering a lawsuit against Apple?
Mm-hmm.
That was just last week or the week before. So if you're not, go back and watch that conversation if you're listening to this one. But the point there is that OpenAI was claiming that Apple was suppressing ChatGPT within their ecosystem and on the phone in particular. And I said, well, yeah, of course they could. What would I always come back to? Need I remind you that Apple owns the channels and the customers? So eventually what I think Apple decided was we can basically create our own version of ChatGPT, not exactly ChatGPT, it's more like the voice mode, right? Mm-hmm. Powered by who?
Gemini.
That's interesting because in the past you thought, oh, Apple, Google, those are enemies. But it turns out they've actually had some pretty productive partnerships. And this is another example where they're coming together. Why? I was thinking about that strategically. I think this is actually a very mature strategic decision to say, Google, you're better at that. You're better with Gemini. You're spending all the money on it. You're really good at that. Just like it did with maps. Right? Our maps sucked as Apple. So we just defaulted to the fact that the users prefer yours. Let's just admit it. Your capability is better. This is called, we talked about it earlier, make or buy. Why make it if you can buy it from somebody who's better at it than you and you can partner with them? And then Google's just recognizing you're really good at your ecosystem. You've got it all wrapped up. We're just recognizing that. You can pay for the underlying technology and license it. We all benefit.
Yeah. I think a lot of companies really took hold of OpenAI because it was the first on the block, and they made a lot of snap decisions, and they're now dissing themselves from Sam Altman and something that's
Microsoft too.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a hunch. I have no.
But this is natural in business. You do not want to be dependent on one supplier.
True.
You just don't.
Very true.
It's not smart.
Google. The DOJ charged a Google employee this week with pocketing millions by making insider trades on Polymarket. Mike, I heard the creator of prediction markets say that we need insider trading for these to work. Insider trading gives insights to the markets and makes them accurate. So therefore, the inside knowledge holders need to be rewarded for their contributions. What do you think?
You can only legally inside trade if you are in Congress. Yes. President. So what this person did would be legal if Congress did it.
That's true.
Okay. The argument you're making is a very typical libertarian argument. You'll see versions of it from people like Robin Hanson, is that actually all information should be public. It should be available.
Yep.
And why is that good? Because even if people are insider, I'm not saying it's good, by the way, I'm just telling you the argument. So even if people are trading on insider information, that information is at least reflected in the prices. So that means the prices that you see are based on the best information.
Yep.
Okay? People find this view fundamentally unfair because they feel like, and I think this is where the law comes from, I think I'm partial to some of that libertarian thinking, right? Like markets do work better when there's more information, better information.
It's more accurate, for sure. Yeah.
But it feels like a little unfair when you have a privileged position in a huge corporation and you're getting information before the market, And that's where this insider trading typically comes from. And so the question, though, I have on this is why this person got prosecuted. Because the enforcement seems very, very selective when it comes to insider trading.
Caught. That's why.
That right? Because insider trading, in my opinion, happens all the time. There's finance literature on this. You can look at finance professors. The leak.
Yep.
Now the leak is what happens before a major announcement. People start to trade, either them or their spouses or friends, before the major announcement comes. That's how Congress ends up being able to do it, because they know what's being discussed behind the scenes before a major legislative announcement comes, right? So they're in these committees, these secret committees, and they get this information and they're able to trade on it, which is the definition of insider trading. So I get why these sort of, trading polymarket type markets are interested in that, because I think they know there's a very strong incentive for this to happen, and it's difficult for them to enforce it. It's very difficult for them to stop it.
Well, my problem with this is just the shape it takes. So I don't have a problem with someone being rewarded for their insider knowledge. So maybe if this was a journalistic outlet that was paying someone for their knowledge to then report on it and make money off that information, I think that arrangement might be fair, depending on what subject we're talking about, I guess. But the fact that it's set up as a betting market where average people go in expecting maybe a fair market, that I have a problem with, because it's not, you're not getting paid for your good information. You're taking that money from other people who are dumb enough to bet you.
You have an unfair arbitrage advantage.
Yeah, for sure.
Is the point.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, so take heed. If you have insider information, go get paid on Polymarket.
I mean, I get the libertarian argument. I also understand the other side very well.
Yeah.
It looks really bad. It looks fundamentally unfair for someone to have their privileged position and get information the market doesn't have yet, and then to capitalize upon that information. The only argument I could think of for making it legal is that everyone at Google would start doing that. And then the information would be fairer. I mean, you still have to be at Google, but it would get out there much faster, and maybe the arbitrage opportunity is lower. That's the only possible argument right now I can think of.
No, apparently there was a rampant outbreak of insider trading from the White House staff. I don't know if that changed anything for you, but
no,
not surprised.
I just think, I mean, that's about the only political opinion you'll ever hear me give. That should be illegal in Congress if it's illegal in the market.
Yeah, I agree.
Period.
All right. A provocative piece making the rounds this week asks whether the revenue numbers driving AI valuations are real, or if a lot of it is circular spending between the AI companies propping each other up. It's a question the market hasn't fully reckoned with yet.
So this one was difficult to dig into. It was a sort of a speculative post out there, and the idea was that the major companies that are investing, such as Microsoft, Google, into these AI startups, they're trading cloud credits, right? So their investment is a cloud credit for these companies. We saw Sam Altman doing something similar,
Y Combinator,
like a token investment with Y Combinator. The difficulty came was, and this is the claim, that when these cloud credits were cashed in, when they start using the cloud, right, and consuming the credits, that's booked as revenue.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's true, okay, it's revenue, but it's not cash. That's not cash, right? So, okay, what's wrong with that? It's legal, by the way, to do this, because this is actually quite typical in corporate venture capital, or in corporate in general. If you want to invest in a startup, you could easily just invest equipment. Yeah. All right, here's some equipment in exchange for something. So this is similar. Here's cloud credits in exchange for an equity position or whatever, or an option or whatever you're trying to get out of it. A right of first refusal. There are all kinds of stipulations you can put in there. What they're intimating, right? What they're hinting at was that there's some funny accounting going on there. The accounting looks okay. Just if you, from what I read, you'd have to dig into this, make sure it's all real. But the problem there is the cash generation. To me, will this return in cash? It is not true, and this is what I was having a problem with in this take. It's not true that those AI startups, such as Anthropic, let's just take Anthropic, are not generating cash. They are now. They're generating actual revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So then the bet is, and this is why it's hard when you see an analysis like that, looking at the current state where it looks funny, right? Strange. Looks kind of like shenanigans. Like this circular financing we talk about sometimes on here. But will the cash and the profit that Anthropic is now generating return back to these companies in the form of actually consumed credits that they pay for? I don't know. That would be the bet, I guess.
Well, what if we change the framing a little bit to
NVIDIA
invests $100 billion into Anthropic. Anthropic pays Oracle $100 billion to build data centers, and Oracle pays $100 billion to NVIDIA for chips and stacks and equipment.
Sounds smart to me. I mean, like you're trying to guarantee. So this is, it looks like monopoly building from the outside.
Yeah.
And if you have an argument in that direction, you have enough evidence for you. I'm going to make an argument in another direction. This is market building.
Mm-hmm.
In market building, if you're growing a pie, you're trying to grow it for everyone. So AI is a new market. It's fundamentally risky. It's also possible that all of these cross-financing, or whatever you want to call it, cross-pollination, I think we used the word last week, will fail. So it all turns out to not, right? So to me, it makes sense to make sure, and actually the Japanese got good at this in their airplane production, car production. Toyota was known for this, is like making sure that you have a really well taken care of supplier so that when things get rough, like the ecosystem survives that you're building and you don't have supply disruptions, etc. So in some ways that's good business. I get what it looks like though. Yeah. I really do. Right?
I mean, as long as NVIDIA is not double dipping, like in my scenario, NVIDIA is the one that's actually giving the cash in the first place and then it's coming back to them. So as long as they're not counting it on their books on both ends, like I think it would be okay, right? I don't know. Maybe they could even count on both ends. I don't know.
I don't think we have enough details on this one. At least I didn't to make a definitive statement.
This would be probably a main topic we'd need to dig into it more. That might be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's look at it in that light at some other point down the road. All right. The COO of Okla, the nuclear startup backed by Sam Altman, made a bold claim this week. The nuclear waste already sitting in storage in the U.S. contains enough energy to power the entire country for 150 years. Could we tap into that?
You know what circularity is? So circularity is a kind of business model where another way you call it is trash to cash.
Yep.
So when you, in any sort of value chain, there's waste. And the idea of circularity comes from people who are really concerned about sustainability and the environment, is that when you produce waste, you take it and you translate it or transform it into productive uses and generate cash. So there are actually examples where you can generate more cash within the business model if you're able to create a circular model. The challenge is that in a value chain, the people often don't work together.
Mm-hmm.
So this waste is often called a feedstock. So let's say like in textiles, there's a lot of waste. There are companies out there that buy the waste and then recycle it, right? And then produce virgin, textile material or other side products, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's essentially what they're saying they're doing here is we're going to take that nuclear waste and repurpose it and create new energy out of it, right? That's at heart kind of a circularity concept to monetize that waste. So I found that interesting. That's something you're going to have to think about. But here's the thing, right? Who is going to be comfortable with that? And this is related to the build out we talked about earlier, where I was challenging people. If the problem is not enough energy, build out. nuclear's got to be a big part of that story. And if you're a company that depends on nuclear waste, you don't want to use it all up, right? You're going to want a continuous supply. So this is part of a broader move, I think, to produce energy for AI, to push nuclear, and then push this idea that the waste actually is not waste anymore. We'll be able to convert it into energy. Now, people are already uncomfortable with data centers next to them. How uncomfortable will they be with, oh, nuclear next to them? Or, oh, nuclear waste company converting it next door? Doubt it. I have a nuclear site right in front of me. I'm comfortable with it because I understand the technology pretty well.
Yeah.
A lot of
Most
people are
people
super skittish.
Yeah. Most people won't. Most people won't understand it. But I mean, you look at 3 Mile Island here, I don't think we had any public deaths from 3 Mile Island. It was handled much more publicly and at an escalated level from what we all know is the disaster that happened in.
Well, that's why you got to go back to your fundamentals. It was first of its kind of disaster in the U.S. It's very visual, and people panic.
Yep.
The only question is, what was the evidence after it? You'd have to look into it to say, was it as disastrous as we imagined, enough to justify the freeze?
I say no.
Right.
I say more people have died in coal mining accidents than ever has died from
Cars?
Yeah.
Automobiles every year?
Well, right, but we're talking about the same industry here. Like coal mining has claimed a lot more lives than nuclear. So it's just the perception is really bad. That's it.
Because it's one of those, it's called availability bias. Like nuclear in general has been very safe.
Yeah.
In general. A few major catastrophes. Chernobyl, by the way, it's a great series if you haven't watched it.
Absolutely.
Chernobyl being one of the best ones. The problem there probably wasn't the technology as much as the Soviet government just being, it was I would say the systemic problem that caused that more than the technology in that case. But that's part of it, right? You need a good system around it for it to function properly.
At least from the show, they had a lot of the same symptoms as the Titanic captain. Like, oh, we can't sink. We'll never sink.
Yeah, but you see that from CEOs and top management all the time. They deny problems exist, right? True. And then the people below don't tell them the truth.
Yep.
My point on that availability bias, though, is when there's a problem, it's huge.
Yeah.
And it's visual, and that taps into, I think, human instinct. And we love catastrophes as much as we're afraid of them. They're dramatic. They make great news stories. Same reason that if you get one plane crash out of millions of flights, it's everywhere on the news.
Yeah.
But you'll never see an automobile crash unless it's like a big tanker or a truck or oil with a train or whatever. And that's a bias that we have. And I think it really affects nuclear.
Yep.
It's also the same bias, I think, playing into that Blue Origin story, that it's a big visual event that news loves. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is it throws your probability calculations off.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we talked about that before, but it'll come up again and again if we do headlines.
Well, let's talk about something that also might be harming us from the inside out. TikTok is expanding well beyond short form video. Not to harm TikTok. They do great at what they do. Payments, shopping, messaging, and more all are in the roadmap as the platform makes a play to become the Western world's version of WeChat. The question is whether American regulators are going to let this happen. I don't know. I bet they do.
Well, even if they did, what's the strategy here? Remember an old episode where we talked about the difference between Google and Yahoo? Mm-hmm. So Google specialized at one thing, dominated. TikTok originally focused on what? Creators, B2C, video, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a social app, but it was video based. In a particular type of video, shorts, basically. That's what we call them these days.
Yep.
Yahoo did literally everything, and Google killed them. So the question is, if you're Google, do you want to become like Yahoo? And if you're TikTok, do you want to become like the equivalent in China is WeChat? It's a super app, is what you call those things. Mm-hmm. You can do literally everything, right, in those things. So the things they wanted to add to TikTok, and this is a strategic question: search, shop, music, games, hotels, payments. Actually, isn't X trying to be the everything app as well? So it's like same thing. X is trying to do video. It didn't really take off, at least as far as I can tell. So can that work strategically? I don't know the answer. It really, I mean, they have a huge audience, so they've got them trapped. But will the audience accept these other services within it
Yeah.
as a super app? I don't know. I wouldn't, but
I watched
that's
this
just me.
weightlifter guy, and he listens to music, and he's always like, "Oh, let's change the TikTok cut for this next one." And I have no idea what he's talking about. Like, I don't listen to music on TikTok. I use TikTok, but I don't use it for music. But apparently, a lot of younger folks do. So I don't know. They're probably getting their news, which is super scary. Their news, information, shopping, everything from TikTok.
Yeah, every video I see on there it's basically music to some video. It's some famous music to video. No, I don't know why that's created, but people like it.
I guess
Right.
so. A friend of ours owns a gas station. It's gas station and novelty store inside, basically. Anyways, but they have a supplier that's like, oh, you have to buy these. And they're like little squishy dumpling things, like stress ball type things. But he says, you have to buy these this week. They're really hot on TikTok. You'll sell it in no time. So like, okay, we'll test the water. We'll buy a box. And they bought a box and they sold it in like 2 hours. They, took a post, put it on Facebook, and they sold it and it took 2 hours because it's a TikTok craze, because the kids see them on TikTok and they just have to have them.
Yeah, I know.
Crazy.
I've seen those.
Crazy.
Fidgets, spinners, stuff like that. Yeah.
All right. Let's leave the fire hose now, and we're going to take you to a wonderful interview that we did earlier in the week with Rita McGrath. If you've ever heard someone argue that the competitive moat is dead, there's a good chance they were quoting today's guest. She's a strategy professor at Columbia, a 5-time author, PhD from the Wharton School, host of Thought Sparks podcast, CEO of Valise Strat Advisory, and one of the most cited voices on innovation and corporate strategy in the world. Rita McGrath, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Thank you so much. You've written much on discovery-driven growth, strategy, and innovation. With the rise of AI and the increasing pace of development, what would you say has changed? Do we need new guidance for the AI age?
I would argue yes. And the evidence for that is if you looked at the asset profile of the largest companies in the world, say in 1975, what you would have seen was 93, 94% of those assets would have been tangible. And the rest would have been, what the accountants all chuckle at, intangible assets, how cute, goodwill left over from some M&A acquisition in the past.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at that same batch of companies today, the rules are inversed. So 93, 94% of the most valuable assets of the most valuable companies are intangible. So it's not plant, property, and equipment anymore. It's IP, it's software, it's patents, it's whatever intangible thing you're creating. Now, what that means for strategy is if you think about where the field came from, it came from that very tangible asset world where the industry was the most important thing, and your position in the industry was really, really important, and your job was to find an attractive position in an attractive industry, throw up entry barriers like crazy, and then giggle to yourself for years as you enjoyed a sustainable competitive advantage. And that was the old recipe. Well, in today's world, that old recipe may work in some places, but it certainly works in far fewer. And if you just take one of the frameworks, a really good framework from those times, I call it Michael Porter's 5 Forces framework. And what Porter did was brilliant. He took the theory of monopoly and applied it to how companies can guarantee themselves great big profits. And he said, well, the recipe's really easy. You have power over your buyers or your suppliers. That means you get better prices or higher margins. You don't have too many rivals. So that's great because competition isn't that fierce. And if your product is hard to substitute for, that's even better. And he turned it all into a recipe. Well, look at the world today. Take Apple, Samsung, and Google, just to name some well-known firms. They're both buyers and suppliers and rivals and substitutes for one another. So, where does that model even fit anymore?
That's a good point. And I think a lot of that comes, especially this Porter thinking, with the thinking of verticals, like clearly defined verticals coming out of World War II, where you're mass producing hardware, let's just call it that, or CPG products. And that's changing. And the list you just gave, like OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Anthropic, Jason and I talk about this a lot. Are they competitors, partners, both? Because it's very difficult to say because it's unclear what the vertical is, if one even exists. And I know you think a lot about that. Is it more that we're in ecosystems and sandboxes of customers, segmentations, or is it this is what Google does, this is what Microsoft does? What do you think? How would you address that? Because I think that's what's making things so complex right now.
Yeah, well, if you go back to the foundations of strategy, right, the whole field was derived from industrial economics, and there are two assumptions in industrial economics. The first is that an industry exists, a vertical, as you describe it, and I would argue that's never been true. We made it up.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there are regularities to being in the aircraft manufacturing business or the trucking business or whatever, but within those businesses, there's as much variation in firm performance as there is across them, right? Now, second thing that industrial economics assumes is that the normal state of things is equilibrium, which is very convenient if you're trying to create an elegant economic theory, but that's not reality. That we're no longer in
Yeah.
an equilibrium state. I mean, everybody since the pandemic has been whining on nostalgically about when do things get back to normal. And, I'm not sure that's even a useful concept anymore. So what I talk about is arenas rather than industries. And yes, indeed, ecosystems are hugely important. Where an arena is a pot of resources. So it could be a customer wallet, it could be a share of time, it could be a physical arena. And your job is to get resources out of that arena, but you have to be aware there's plenty of other people that would like to do the same thing. And so you have to understand competition far more broadly than I think historically we have.
I think I come from automotive deeply, right? From Bosch and then Manham on my last company. And I think automotive is a good example because you go from producing the car, that's automotive, right? And you have a complex value chain. It's mostly hardware based. You have your tier one component suppliers, tier two, and on down the line, all the way up to your franchisees, and you're driving your car. That all starts to break down. Well, how long ago now? 2016, 17, maybe even before, with the rise of Tesla. And I remember people in the industry saying they'll never make it. And then Uber comes along, and I'm bringing it up for a very good reason because that starts to expand the idea of mobility. And then when you expand it to mobility, then it becomes clear, okay, well, there are many ways to travel, right? You could walk in Europe, right? You can ride a bike, etc. And then now, one of the examples I like to give is like Xiaomi. It's literally a mobile car, right? Like mobile, right? Like it's about entertainment and the rest. And Jason and I like to talk about NVIDIA. They came from gaming. And now they're huge in mobility and AI. So I think that really speaks to what you're saying is it all goes back in the end to what Clayton Christensen said, right? What is the job?
Exactly.
Right. And then the ecosystem kind of forms around that. And then the enemies at the gates can come from anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you take building on Uber and Waymo in the automotive business, think about this bizarre joint venture between Uber and Waymo. And it's fascinating, because each of those companies, I think the strategy is pretty clear when you look at it. Uber would really like to be the dominant platform for autonomous driving, right? I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
The way they've been positioning themselves. Waymo would like to be the dominant tech player in autonomous driving, kind of the way they are with, the Pixel cameras and the Android ecosystem. And so they've created this sort of very strange marriage of convenience where Waymo said, yes, I'd like to have access to Uber's users. And Uber has said, great, I'd like to really have you as an example of a lead customer who's going to use our platform. Who knows where that's going to end?
Yeah, who knows? Jason and I just saw an example where Rivian is actually starting to talk to Uber about providing like a fleet, right? So that's a different business model altogether. Jason, what else we got?
Yeah, I kind of want to take it for a curveball here, but I'll lead it back into our discussion. But you're on the board for McCarter Theater, which is known for its pre-Broadway breakout productions. It's pretty cool, from my opinion. I love theater. What is it that you love the most about the performance arts?
Oh, performance arts. I think the ability to be entertained and to learn new things and to have an experience that is in person and has that sort of tangible depth to it. So one thought I have is that as much of the world becomes more digital around us, I think we're going to find much more pleasure and much more
Mm,
value in things that are actually person to person. So I see
yeah.
this in my own classrooms, which is for a while there, you may remember this, Mike. There was this period of time where everybody was saying, oh, in person, especially executive education, is going to be dead. Nobody's going to authorize travel budgets anymore. And what we're finding is the demand for the in person experience is through the roof. You cannot give away the online courses unless there's some kind of interpersonal dimension to them.
Now you talk a lot about inflection points, and those are, well, one, you might describe what that is when I'm done with my part. They're related to customer behavior though, right? And I think one of the ironies is, and I've had some little X arguments with people, because everybody's talking about a post-labor society. Simultaneously, they're talking about AI slop, which is the notion that AI is just throwing out so much volume of product and images and text that maybe what you're saying is because that's a commodity now, maybe art rises again as something that's differentiated in Porter's language, actually, right? So these individual face-to-face encounters actually become more valuable as that slop increases. What do
Mhm.
you think about that? And maybe relate it to inflection points
Sure.
in customer behavior. Because when I was reading your book, let me hold it up. When I was reading this book, you were talking about social media, and at the time, people were thinking like, "Oh my God, in-person interactions, it's over, right? Our privacy is destroyed. Nobody's talking to each other anymore. There are behavioral problems arising." Do you think that's a revolt against that? What you're talking about, this rise of in-person, maybe more
Um,
interactions in that nature?
look, I think we're seeing it unevenly. And I think there's some root causes to it. But let me spend just a second on inflection points. So, the way I define it, a strategic inflection point, is it's something that changes. You can think about it as your envelope of constraints. It changes what's possible. Often it's technology, not always. It could be legal, it could be regulatory, it could be
Yeah.
anything else. But it changes what's possible by an order of magnitude, by 10x, 100x, something. So 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, 10 times smarter. And the interesting thing about that as a strategist is what do you do with that? If it comes out of the woodwork and bops you on the side of the nose, like what's the point strategically? And then when I really dug into it, what I realized was these things progress almost the way Ernest Hemingway used to talk about. In his book Sun Also Rises, one character says to another, well, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer was, well, two ways, gradually and then suddenly.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where we are with this whole conversation about humanity and people and whatnot. And one of the things I am troubled by is some of the work that Jonathan Haidt has from NYU
Yes.
been promoting,
Yeah.
well, has been describing, right? And he wrote this wonderful book called The Anxious Generation. And what he's found is that once you introduce social media to young brains, that it interferes with their ability to develop, to play, to form meaningful connections, and then throw a global pandemic on top of that, and it gets pretty grim. So one of my concerns is at some level, we're seeing these really addictive digital products become so much easier to deal with than actual difficult human beings. That it's easier to take that route. And then, unfortunately, people kind of feel empty. They don't feel connected. The reported rates of loneliness are at all-time high. People aren't socializing the way that they used to. The idea of your community association or whatever that was you used to belong to is starting to fade. So I think some of the effects of this are not yet seen. But what I would say at the same time, in parallel and almost in contradiction, is the value people are putting on in-person education, in-person gatherings, in-person music. If you think about concerts, I mean, they're sold out. Why? Because back to my McCarter observation, people want to feel they're witnessing something that's unique in the company of other people.
Yeah. One of the interesting things in your book, and it's the way I've been thinking about this lately too, is that disruption starts on the periphery.
Mhm.
So when you're sitting at the top of a corporate hierarchy, you have an information problem, it's difficult to get those signals that you're talking about.
Very much so.
And maybe one of the hardest parts is that there are pockets, as you said. There are little signals bubbling up. And by the time the bubbles start to get bigger, and now it's boiling, it's too late often. So, one of the things that's difficult though is to determine whether it's going to be one that disrupts, causes a 10x difference or not. How do you think about that? Because we have biases too, right? So we only see the things we want to see and we want to believe things. So how do you
Oh,
think
totally.
about that?
Well, the dominant wisdom at the Columbia Business School where I work is that what AI and this middle management shrinking and all the layoffs have done is they created a flight to quality. We'll be fine. So
Uh,
I will let that just lie there for 1 minute. So I think it's useful to have a very specific definition of disruption.
yes.
Because, Clay Christensen, my dear late friend, popularized this notion years ago. And unfortunately, what's happened to that concept is it's come to mean anything that's a big change. And
Yeah.
I think we're actually better served by having a very specific definition of it. So here's how I look at it. Disruption has two major components. It's when something that was once really difficult is suddenly made easy so that
Yeah.
ordinary people can do what it once took specialists and experts and whatnot to do. And the second condition is when it's taking something that was really inaccessible or expensive and making it accessible and affordable. And if you combine those two, what you get is this absolute disruptive force. And this is where incumbent firms so often get messed up and they
Yeah.
miss these inflection points. And why is that? It's because they built assets and success recipes. And, you've seen this at many places around the recipe of the past. And what they don't realize is the ground has shifted under them. But it takes a long time, as you said, for that information to get from the edges to the corner office. And then, often what that means is you've now got to completely rethink what it is you're doing. And so the assets that served you really well at one point can now suddenly turn into liabilities. So an interesting specific example of this is if you think about the sort of 2012, 2013 emergence of the direct-to-consumer fad, right? You may recall that. So this would be Harry's and Dollar Shave Club and Glossier and all those firms.
Yeah.
Well, what they were taking advantage of was customers by then had been trained that they could order stuff online. So they were already in that behavior. They'd been trained you could safely hand your credit card over to somebody. And they'd been trained that this was a super and convenient way to shop. But if you think of the incumbents, I'll take Gillette just as a case in point. Gillette had billions of dollars of assets, computer servers and dedicated programmers and manufacturing facilities and all this stuff. And these incumbents, these incomers to these fields, they don't have to buy computer servers. By then, the cloud was well established. You don't have to hire programmers. You take an off-the-shelf e-commerce site and slap your brand on it, and boom, there you're done. You don't need to make anything. You order it from South Korea, and it sits in a warehouse. And. So the cost structure of being able to be a fast-paced consumer products company just changed by an order of magnitude, and it took a lot of incumbents by surprise.
Another great example from your book is Blockbuster,
Mhm.
because we often have the impression with disruption, it's one thing.
Mhm.
But in the case of Blockbuster, and I like the way you looked at it, it's the combination of the customer job. It's the fact that Blockbuster had all this real estate. They had a moat, right? You had to go there to get the actual thing and then bring it back. But it wasn't just the customer job changing, it was the definition of what is entertainment in the home. It was capabilities arising at that time that streaming actually came much later before the problem arose. You talk about that. I
Mhm.
think that's a really good example of that what used to be a moat actually becomes asymmetric cost for you,
Yep.
right? So that was a really good example in the book. Jason, what else we got?
We hear the phrase edge computing frequently in today's landscape, and I can't help but notice similarities between edge computing for computer systems and your philosophies of permissionless organization and how snow melts at the edges for corporates. Can you discuss how quick edge decision making is a must in today's environment?
Sure. So if you think about the competitive advantage back in the kind of industrial age that we're sort of leaving behind in many cases, it was producing a million widgets exactly. And so your advantage, right, was reliability, high quality production, and it didn't change like every minute. It didn't change. So you had time to get your decision sort of to the center and then back down again. And the theory at the time, and we've forgotten this now, but when bureaucracy was first introduced, and it's a dirty word now, but when it was first introduced, this was seen as a marvel of scientific management. Because for the very first time, you had division of labor into specializations, and you had professionalization of the various functions. You had division of functions, so your best marketers did marketing, and your best accountants did accounting, and so forth. You had clear hierarchies with decision rights. And this was such a big improvement over the kind of organizations that had existed before this, where you had the guy in power, the person in power, and they just kind of told everybody what to do, and everybody sort of muddled along. So scientific management brought to management gave us bureaucracy, and that was seen as a big advance. And indeed it was for that mass production era. So what's happening now is that the speed of things has picked up. Further, that you really don't have time for decisions to go all the way up some kind of hierarchy and then all the way back down again, on the theory that only at the top of the hierarchy does all the information come together. So that's where decisions should be made. Today, what we know is that the most vibrant, the most recent, the most relevant information exists at the edges. It's where some guy on a loading dock says, huh, that's weird. I never saw that name brand in here before. Or somebody observing a customer says, oh, why did they pick that one? And so that's what you'd like to have is clarity around your fundamental reason for being. And then if you like, I can get into that a little bit better. But if everybody's clear on what the center of your organization is, then they can take very independent action without having to get permission because we're all aligned. A great example of this is the Korean fintech company Toss, which was founded by this dentist, S.G. Lee, who decided that dentistry was, less interesting than having a company that could have a bigger impact. I'm sure his parents, by the way, are still very sorrowful that he gave up dentistry.
Yeah.
So he formed a company called Toss in the light of how cumbersome it was just to get stuff done in the financial realm in South Korea. And so what he's done with Toss is it's all about erasing friction, making life less difficult for customers. And what he talks about is being very aligned on the mission, but very loosely coupled as an organization. And so the design element here is if I'm tightly coupled, we're tightly coupled, right? So think of like an electricity network. And if one part of the network goes down, if it's tightly coupled, that outage just spreads through the whole network. And now you've got like a regional blackout. But we learned that that's dangerous, So what we do is we put in breakers, right? So if this part of the network goes down, the rest of it can continue to function. So what you want to create as an organizational analog is situations where teams can work consistently together, but they're not tightly coupled, they're loosely coupled. So you can do your thing and I can do my thing, and we don't need to be connected and consulting with each other all the time. And I think from a strategic point of view, I don't think we give nearly enough thought to where should coupling be tight. Now, tight coupling is very good under a couple of circumstances: stability, reliability. Where everything has the same reaction in proportion to each other, it gives you a lot of advantages. And we saw this years ago when we had very tightly coupled supply chains. You may remember these supply chains were optimized to within an inch of their lives, and any little perturbation anywhere down the thing, and the whole thing just collapses. A port goes down and the whole global network goes away. So what we've learned now is we have to start building these more loosely coupled systems when we're thinking about these things. The other interesting thing there is a lot of times when I go to a company and I say, who in your company is actually responsible for your organization design? I get these blank looks. It's like it just sort of happens. Like nobody's actually said, what's the science we have learned and how do we apply that to what kind of organization we should be creating in order to execute against the strategic challenges we have?
So in many ways, it's like you say in programming, like in other contexts, strong opinions but loosely held would be the right way to approach an uncertain environment. And you also pointed out there, disintermediation can be a very fertile place to look for innovation. And I wonder, this is something I wondered, and I think you made reference to it in the university environment, was can AI help with discovery-driven growth? Because can it collapse that mediating layer of information in corporates so that information goes from Jason used to be in sales. So if Jason learns something from a customer, God forbid that get to the CEO, right? That could happen relatively immediately if Salesforce, for example, integrates AI and you bypass the middle management.
Mhm.
And in fact, we just saw the quote. Who was that guy, Jason? It was Cloudflare. CEO says,
Matthew Prince.
he said that, yeah, he said that the people under threat are the measurers, the people in the middle. It's not the creators and not the sellers. So, what do you think about AI's role in maybe collapsing the information problem and actually allowing you to do more of this discovery driven growth, which requires, if you read the book, great book, by the way, classic, experimentation,
Mhm.
hypothesis driven innovation and strategy?
Yeah. So I think it's the future. I think that's where the future will be, because if you follow the principles in discovery-driven growth, and I'll just take a minute to explain where that all came from. So discovery-driven planning, which was the article that came out in 1995, and then the book came out some years later, had its roots in this puzzle to me that I was studying when I was doing my doctorate degree. And this was that all these big companies, Bosch would be an example, Walt Disney
Yeah.
would be an example, all these big companies would get into areas that were sometimes only moderately new to themselves and just have these colossal failures.
Yeah.
So I started to collect these case studies in a file I call my flops file. You have to lose your parent company at least $50 million to get into my flops file. That's the bar.
Yeah.
And what I found when I looked at them across the pattern was this very common pattern of failure. So untested assumptions taken as facts,
Yes.
very few opportunities for low commitment, low cost testing. Leaders often given a very aggressive deadline and this thing has to launch in 18 months or else. I'm sure you've been party to those conversations. Um, so kind of committed to a course of action without ever exploring whether that was the correct one or not. A lot of times big budgets and big teams up
Big
front
bets.
on the theory that that's going to accelerate progress, right? We're going to get our 18 months much faster. And so my colleague and I began to think about, well, how would you design a system when you didn't have the kind of certainty you have in your core business?
Yeah.
And what your job is instead is learning. And we kind of said each of those principles is wrong. So what we want is start with what the end is in mind. So what does success look like? And then, okay, what does that imply for how many units we need to sell? How many transactions we need to have? How big does this thing need to be? And so you work backward and then you say, okay, does this thing pass the market test? Is it even realistic? And a lot of ideas just die at that point if you're doing this right.
Yeah.
Then you have the operational specifications. So, okay, if I've got to sell 50 every day, how many sales calls does that imply my salespeople need to make? And since you don't know what you're doing at this early stage, you're going to be making assumptions. And what we encourage you to do in this technique is write them down. And then the last piece of it is you plan, but you don't plan this 18-month glorious launch. You plan for a few checkpoints. And a checkpoint is a moment at which you're going to convert assumptions into facts. You're going to learn something. So when I think about technology, and I'm actually I'd love to show this to you. I'm doing some work with a Finnish company called Kato Software that has this really interesting way of connecting budgets and strategy and
Yeah.
resources, people. And they're now embedding some of these ideas in a module in that software. And what I think it can do is, so, Mike learns something about a customer that takes the form of testing an assumption. You put in
Yeah.
what you learned and what you did. And now anybody in the company can see that. And if you design the AI appropriately, the next time, George is starting a project, and it's sort of with a similar set of customers, the AI could say to you, George, let's just reflect a little on what Mike learned in that last project. So let's make our own mistakes. Let's not repeat the mistakes over and over again. So I think AI has tremendous potential to make that all transparent. And right now it's not. It's the state of the art, shockingly to me, is still spreadsheets and PowerPoints.
Do you know the irony of what you just described is because people will say corporates cannot innovate because they're risk averse, but what you're describing, they're actually taking massive risks,
All the time.
right? So they're placing huge bets on unfounded assumptions.
Uh-huh.
And I think this goes back to Tushman and O'Reilly and ambidexterity. It's the misidentification of the context.
Mhm.
So in your core business, although I think this is also rapidly deteriorating, that you can actually do planning and execution, the Soviet 5-year plan, as I like to call it. So it's when you're, and I want to relate this to MBAs and the MBA system that we have in place right now, because I think you have something to do with that. Maybe, maybe not, but you'll correct us. So in the MBA, you learn from day one, it's a deterministic world. You do the case study, there's always a right answer, and your professor knows it. You go into the corporate world, and even in the MBA, it's chopped up into like departments, right? Like you have your marketing class, your accounting class, and you never really get this systems view. You go into the real world, you enter a department, sales, engineering, whatever, you execute in your little silo, you get promoted, and you've always been successful. That's why you got promoted. And one of the problems with that is you were operating in a very certain environment, relatively certain in your core business, where most decisions were correct. You had the right tools.
Mm-hmm.
The problem comes when you're making a decision that's even a little bit away from that core business, even in an adjacency where uncertainty starts to rise really high. And I think the fatal error, and just comment on this, is not seeing the uncertainty, not recognizing it, and then treating the plan as if it gets rid of the uncertainty. So then the only explanation for failure, and this is what I think causes toxic environments, is execution. That's the only possible explanation, is you just failed to execute the plan. But I think what we see in your book is there are thousands of reasons to fail.
Yeah.
Thousands, maybe millions in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you say, how do you educate executives to even recognize uncertainty? They say it, but then they behave like it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
How do you train new MBAs who are going into corporate a lot of times to embrace discovery-driven, just a mentality? It's a mental model in the end.
It is. Well, boy, I have so many answers to that question. So let me start with if you think about the basic life cycle of a competitive advantage. And I don't even know if we can call it competitive advantage anymore, but for now, I haven't come up with anything better, so we'll stick with that. So the messy part is the upfront part, the innovation, the clanging together of technologies and ideas and people and opportunities and the entrepreneurial function, whether it's an entrepreneur inside a big company or a startup person, is to put those things together in some kind of combination, which then goes in search of product market fit or service market fit. So something that a customer will actually pay for. If we find that, right, then there's a process of acceleration where you're launching the thing into the world. And then if you are successful at that, which isn't guaranteed, then you have this wonderful period of exploitation, right? And what you can predict is that that won't last. Now, why won't it last? Well, anything is going to reach diminishing returns, eventually. Yeah. Secondly, competitors are going to copy you. Customers they adapt easily. They get used to whatever the cool thing was that you did, and now they want to know what's next. I mean, what are we on, iPhone 17 or 19? It's got 4 cameras. It's got, I don't know, it scratches your back. I don't know what it does. But, people are not standing out all night in the rain to get their hands on the next one because they've come to expect all these truly magical features are just table stakes right now. Okay, so your advantage is going to come under pressure, and then very often it's going to go into erosion. So the first observation I would make about the MBA curriculum is it's great at exploitation. It has virtually nothing to say about the front part of that life cycle, and it has very little to say about the end part. Maybe a class on like turnarounds or something, but by and large, if you think about the classic departments in an MBA program, they're teaching you about a business that exists and how do you keep it running well. And not that that's a bad thing, but it's certainly not a complete life cycle. So the second problem that I find is, as you said, there's in many schools, there's an over-reliance on cases. Now, the dirty little secret about cases is, first of all, if you're reading the case about Walmart, you're never going to be better than Walmart at logistics. If you're reading the case about Dell, you're never going to be better than Dell at.
And the survivorship bias.
Of course.
Yeah.
And what most people don't realize is to get the data to write a case, a classic business school case, you have to have the cooperation of the company.
Sanitized.
Well, what does that mean? That means they get a final say over what gets into the print and not. So the real stories are almost never the ones you see in cases. Now, I'm not saying they're not useful. I'm not saying they're not useful teaching tools, especially in the core MBA age. You're about
Yeah.
26 to 28. You don't have a lot of experience to inform. So I think cases have a role to play,
Yeah.
but never going to give you that breadth. So one of the things that I focus on is I focus mostly on executives, and the beauty of teaching executives is they're not locked
They're in it.
into a they're in it. And the
Yeah.
reason they come to my class is they want to get an answer. So I have a funny story on this. So there was a gentleman that had kind of an unusual name. His name was Maximilian, and then he had an unusual last name. And he'd come to my class, and we really enjoyed him, and it was a great experience. And then maybe 2 years later, I'm looking at the class roster for my upcoming class, and I see his name, and I thought, well, that's really weird. There must have been a typo. Somebody copied over the roster from some time ago. But no, it turned out to be the same guy. He took the class twice because he found the context to resolve the problems to be so useful that it was actually worth his investing another week to do, not the same exact material, but to do a similar process to work his way through this thorny problem. And I felt really good about that.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to be confronted with that, right? Like you need the volume. There's a reason VCs get good at what they're doing. I mean, they're using heuristics probably too much, but they get used to the uncertainty and corporate execs just don't.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think? Jason and I have, I think, a passion about this conversation. The corporate form itself has not really innovated. And I'm bringing up the role of boards.
Mhm.
How should the role of boards change? How can we innovate there? Because technically they have a fiduciary duty,
Mhm.
right, to look for the signals that you talk about in your books.
Mhm.
But I don't think they do it. They end up mostly being golf buddies. Let me just
Sports?
say it crassly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
is there any hope there, or how would you approach that? Because they need education too.
They do. So I'm actually on the Blue Ribbon Commission for the National Association of Corporate Directors. And I basically made the point that you just made, which is that, if you want to be an informed board member, you can't just accept the board package from management and think you know what's going on. You've got to go talk to customers, be on the front
Right.
lines, buy the product yourself, or talk to people that are if you really want to do your job as a fiduciary, then you really need to do that. So in the near term, I think there's a lot of board awareness, board education, board selection. Like, why do all board members have to be in their 70s? Wouldn't it make sense to put somebody who's 35 and maybe a digital native on the board? So I think we just got
Same
some
in Congress, right?
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think we've come to take these norms for granted on
Yeah.
boards that they're all kind of the same, and I think what we know about good, tough decision making and advising is you want creative conflict, you want distinct points of view, you want people who abrade each other a little bit, and a lot of boards are not set up that way. To come back to your earlier question, innovating the corporate form, if you think about it, this era that we're moving out of, which I would characterize as mass production, industrial grade, and you're probably familiar with the work of Carlota Perez, and I'm very taken with her work, which is capitalism moves in these large,
Yeah.
generational shifts, and we are leaving behind that era. Now, if you think about the articles of incorporation. What is a C corporation? What is what are the things that go into it? Why was it set up that way? It was set up that way because we were managing big physical assets.
Liabilities.
Therefore, we needed investors to invest. Therefore, they needed protection from risk as much as possible
Yeah.
and a possibility of a return. And it worked great throughout the whole mass production paradigm. We're moving now into a world where I believe the unit of value creation is more and more small teams and even individuals. And so the very concept of what a corporation is may be undergoing, a generational evolution. So imagine if you had an ecosystem of small independent ventures, all of them were LLCs. Let's say all of them are
Yeah.
owner owned. They don't have a board. They don't have investors. They don't have this stupid, live your life for the benefit of the shareholders mindset. And they're all cooperating to do something really cool for a customer. What's the corporate form?
Well, and there are interesting ethical problems that arise. I mean, you already were mentioning it in that seeing around corners, the role of privacy, especially with the rise of AI. And directors have sort of the protection from liability with directors insurance, et cetera. I don't know if that should be the case anymore,
Mm,
especially when you're getting so many signs, right? And maybe we need a downsizing of corporate form, and maybe AI does help there
mm,
because you can spin up a company, get your demo out the door in a few seconds these days,
absolutely.
right? So, all right, Jason, I think we maybe steered off course a little bit. What else we got?
Yeah, let's take another turn. We've seen the financial sector get out in front of its skis multiple times since the turn of the century. I was captivated by your philosophy of getting banking back to basics. With private equity and crypto offerings soon coming to Americans' 401k offerings, and now we're seeing massive IPOs from AI companies that could potentially gain instant incorporation into index funds. What's your take on our direction today?
Well, I think we're at this turning point between the old system and the new one. And this turning point in history has been characterized by the following things: income inequality, because the old system is losing its ability to drive productivity improvement. And when that starts to happen, capital goes nuts. It goes into what Carlotta calls a casino economy. And
Yeah.
that happens during the first sort of initial burst of a new technology, which in our case would be digital technologies, and then the kind of installation of the infrastructure. And during this installation phase, capital's out there doing wacky stuff, right? And the problem is you can make a lot more money doing derivatives on derivatives on derivatives and special deals and blah, 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 blah in the casino than you regularly could do doing ordinary productive things that, businesses that like have to turn a profit, those kind of businesses. So what usually happens, if the past is a guide, is there's some kind of crash or war or calamity that suddenly causes the finance sector to get its wings clipped. Um, One could argue that very few countries took advantage of that after the 2008 Great Recession. So in America, we decided to save the banks. We decided to keep the party going.
Yeah. Moral
Um,
hazard.
Right? In Iceland, this is interesting. In Iceland, they didn't, they bit the bullet. They let the financial sector, shrink. They endured the pain for a couple of years, but then they got this almost golden age lining up of the financial sector with the real economy. So the thing that I think is really important
Mm.
for our listeners to recognize is, if something can't go on forever, it won't. And this is, crypto, da, 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 da. I mean, it's a casino. And we know that absent some extraordinary circumstance, that most casinos end in some kind of crash or collapse. And we saw that multiple times during the last technological regime. We saw it a little bit in the Great Recession. The banks just, again, got way out of their skis and government did nothing. So, one of the things I think that people don't appreciate enough is that government has a hugely important role to play in creating the guardrails within which capital operates. Capital by itself is a non-moral thing. It doesn't have preferences. It doesn't have points of view. It
Yeah.
will go where it's directed to go by the rules in place in the system. And that's where government comes in. And I think we've gone through this complete and total brainwashing about, government should be run like a business and government's not a good thing and regulations are bad. Well, come on. Do you want to live in a world where you can't trust what you buy in a grocery store? You can't trust what you're prescribed in a medical world. You can't walk out on the street because there's nobody regulating which way traffic goes. I mean, don't be ridiculous. Nobody would want to live in a world like that. And yet, when it comes to government enforcing sensible restrictions on what companies do, we get all up in arms and it's like, oh, government's interfering. Government's always interfered. That's its job. Now, here's another really interesting thing to me. So a lot of these, finance people go, lobby, 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 get rid of regulations, get rid of all this risk, blah, blah, blah. Well, Exhibit A, Silicon Valley Bank, which
Yeah.
lobbied like crazy to get restrictions on how much it had to be stress tested, how much risky investment it could take, how much backstopping it had to do for its accounts. And they were successful. They got the regulations lifted. And guess what? They went
Yeah.
bust. Because
Yeah.
those regulations were there for a purpose.
One of the problems is, and this is my dilemma, I think in capitalism, the price is the price the market's willing to bear given the information. But one of the biggest problems right now is the information flow is so chaotic, right? So we had an example, Allbirds. It was a shoe company, just put a .ai basically on, and then their valuation shoots way up, stock price. Elon, SpaceX. Now you're putting together Cursor and XAI and SpaceX and this big narrative. And it seems like people are just placing a huge bet on the narrative. And as long as there's someone willing in the future to pay for that, the next greater fool theory, right? Then I don't even know what government could do there. Do you have any ideas how we could? It kind of reminds me of Warren Buffett. Like, how do you measure actually the fundamentals of a real business
Mhm.
given uncertainty? Because maybe Elon, maybe there's something pops out of that. All of his experiments, like Starlink, maybe could disrupt telecarriers or
Mhm.
whatever. I just don't know how you deal with that because it's so uncertain. He's such a good salesman, and people say don't doubt Elon, right? So for a reason.
Yeah, well, bubbles are like that, right? I mean, the problem with a bubble, and I'll stick to AI mainly, right? Why is everybody chasing these things? Is you can't unilaterally disarm if that's the game that you want to be in.
Yeah,
Because if you're out, that means you're out, right? You're no longer a participant in that sector. So one of the fundamental challenges of being a leader in those kinds of environments is it's a bit like the war of attrition. You know, I used to play this parlor game with my MBAs when I still taught MBAs, and the parlor game kind of goes like this. Okay, you're going to bid on $100 bill, and I'd hold up $100 bill, and the bids go like this. You're allowed to bid in $5 increments, and you have to have the actual money in your wallet. And the winner of the $100 is going to be the person that has the next to last bid. Now, the smart ones realize that there's no way to win at this. You don't even want to start, right? But they're MBAs, they're competitive, so digging in their wallets, they want the $100, and the highest bid I've ever gotten for it was $240.
for 100%. Yeah,
Now, the reason I tell that story is because it's very human. If dropping out, means you've lost, like you lose. Oh, the other quirk to the game was whoever lost had to give their winnings to the person that won. So the person that wins gets my $100 plus whatever was bid by the loser. And so what that pushes you to do is this war of attrition. So how do bubbles end? Bubbles usually end, as I said, either with a catastrophe, with something like a run on the bank, whatever the modern day equivalent of it is. The bubble in the Great Recession started to end when a couple of bankers, was it Lehman Brothers? But a couple of bankers just
yeah,
said, we can't collect on these mortgages. And they were like relatively low level people. And they just said, we're trying to go after these mortgage backed, whatever they were, and we can't collect on them. And that sent a little mini ripple through. I remember I was exercising at the time reading this like short article in Business Week about, something like flaws found in the mortgage-backed processing industry. Well, that caused a whole lot of smarter people and a whole lot of people farther up the food chain to say, well, what have we actually got in these portfolios? And
yeah,
came to the conclusion that they were all labeled A grade risk and they were actually complete crap. And then everybody wanted to be the first person in to get their money out. So that's the other thing that happens. It's got this run on the bank sort of shape. Well, okay, I'm never going to get back what I invested, but let me get back what I can. And all
yeah.
of a sudden, the capital flows start to go the other way.
Playing on loss aversion, right? And then what you're talking about reminds me of Taleb. So Nassim Taleb and Black Swans. It's just that now we're running the bet like at much larger volumes over and over and over, right? So eventually one of those is going to hit, right?
Well, that's the theory, right? Now, the other
Yeah,
way the bubble ends is there's a convincing winner,
yeah.
you know.
But
And
AI, so this is something we keep talking about. It looks like investors thought it was a winner take all. There's no other way to understand why OpenAI is getting so much investment or Anthropic.
that's right.
But you're already seeing that it's not winner take all. They're segmenting. Anthropic's going enterprise. OpenAI still has a little bit of B2C. You have your open source models, your Chinese models. I don't know how that ends. I
Well,
really don't. Like,
Well, if you think about what makes a winner take all market, and this is all the way back to the theory of natural monopoly, right? What makes a winner take all market make sense is when the cost to create a replica is too high. So,
no.
once somebody's established a foothold, the cost to catch up with them is overwhelming. Secondly, when there are natural unit economics, so the cost to serve each additional customer is cheaper for the person, the entity that gets bigger. And the more recent reason winner take all markets emerge is when there's sticky network effects. But here's the thing. Network effects are wildly misunderstood. Everybody thinks about them as infinite. So the idea about an
Yeah.
effect, just for people that aren't familiar with it, if you think of the willingness to pay for a product, So what's my willingness to pay for a notebook? Whatever it is, $2.99. And that doesn't change. So the fact that Mike owns a notebook and Jason owns a notebook and I own a notebook don't really affect the value of our notebooks. But if you imagine a dating site, right? And if you imagine you're the only person on that dating site, unless you're a complete narcissist, it has no value. So every additional person that comes on the dating site adds value. Now, here's the place where people get tripped up. They think these curves are infinite, that, it's always better the more people are on it. And in a lot of situations, it's not. And I think this is where AI is finding itself, which is in many applications, it's better if there are fewer people using it. So I'll give you a specific. A lot of AI right now is being used in pricing for things like hotel rooms and groceries and stuff like that. Here's the problem. The AI is drawing from the same body of data. And so it's providing all these different companies with the same answer. And so to the government, the pricing structures that they're introducing to the market look as though there's collusion when there isn't collusion. It's that they're all using the same AIs to get the same results. So it has the actual effect of collusion without there actually being anything illegal going on. I don't see anybody having a big solution to that right now, but that's an example where you'd be better off using a specialized, smaller AI that everybody else wasn't using.
It almost requires like a zero-sum game somehow to capture it like that. And it's not, is part of the point, right?
Yeah. And there are very few truly natural monopolies. And this actually is another really interesting scenario to me for AI. So it would not be beyond the power of a government to say, AI is our generation's version of electricity. You know how we do electricity? You know how we do electricity? We make them regulated utilities. They're run for efficiency. They should be priced so the vast majority of people can easily afford them. They should not be reserved for the few. They should be like water, clean water, electricity, energy. It would not be beyond a government to simply say, we're gonna,
And if you look at the energy requirements, that might come anyway.
It might.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might.
All right, Jason.
Well, we're coming up here on the top of the hour, Rita. I kind of want to open the floor to you and tell our audience where they can find you, where they can get your books. I think you have a new book coming up later this year, if my LinkedIn snooping proved correct.
Yeah, so I have an HBR article that's coming out very soon, which is on this topic of, in a dematerializing world, how do you find the center of your organization? And I think that'll be fun. That's coming out it'll be available online soon, and then the July-August edition will have it in hard form. The book is being worked on. It's coming along. That'll probably be out next year. So I have a very creatively named website, ritamcgrath.com, and I post there. I have a Thought Sparks podcast, which is released every week, and they're interesting conversations with all kinds of people. We should definitely get you on, Mike. And I also publish in Fast Company. I have a regular column there. So there's lots of ways of interacting. And then this new thing I'm trying to build software that does this thing we were talking about, making it really transparent, who's learning what and what status things are. So
this is Valise, right?
This is through Valise, and through my partners, my Finnish partners, Kato Software. So
yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
Rita,
great conversation. I think we could talk for multiple hours.
We could totally do that.
All right, we hope you enjoyed that interview with Rita McGrath. She's really one of the leading lights when it comes to strategy, innovation. And if you want to think more systematically, rigorously, thoroughly about AI and where it's going, she's the mind you want to run to. You can read her books. She's got great books out there. I just read one of her recent ones called Seeing Around Corners. It's the perfect book to think about AI. She has a weekly podcast called Thought Sparks. And she's a prolific author. I think she has some more stuff coming out in Harvard Business Review and other publications. And we hope you really enjoyed that. That's our goal here, is have her challenge our thoughts, we challenge hers, and we all try to get smarter together.
Absolutely. Tell us what you thought about the episode. Tell us what you want to hear. If there's anything you want to know about, let us know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, check out our Clips channel. We'll see you next week.
Mama, I think I made it. I'm kinda like Tulsa famous. I'm hanging out with Gary. Now they know what my name is. Feeling like Sir Mike, it's money in my name, bitch. Humble to perform on